Hey, folks, Zach Ostrom here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. This is Mind Your Banners for Wednesday, May 21st, 2025. Sorry, it has been a little while. Obviously, not a lot going on in the IU sports world just at the moment. Mike Neislick and I have both kind of been trading some much-needed time off, but we're back with a Mind Your Banners special today. We have Brandon Gaudin, who many of you will know from his time with Fox, with the Big Ten Network. Brandon, we have more Atlanta Braves fan listeners than you think with his time as the voice of the Atlanta Braves, and an Indiana native, an Evansville native. So, Brandon, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. The dead time of year comes and Zach digs deep in his phone. He's like, who can I convince to come on to Mind Your Banners? And I'm glad that it is my time today.
Yeah, Zeller told me no, so I just got that's a lie. So I don't even have to specify which Zeller. Just a background on Brandon. He grew up in Evansville, like me. Grew up whiling away the summer evenings watching Braves baseball. Unlike me, actually, I love this story. Wrote Skip Carey a letter, the legendary Skip Carey, sort of asking about getting into broadcasting. Skip wrote him back. I assume it was full of dry humor, but also a lot of encouragement for what someone who would want to get into play-by-play broadcasting should do. I'm sure Brandon would want me to tell you that during his time at Butler University, he was named a top 10 male student at Butler. I made sure to include that. Spent time with minor league baseball, voice of Evansville, correct?
Yeah.
The voice of the Purple Aces, obviously at Butler. Replaced Wes Durham, one of the other voices of my childhood, is the grandson of a Georgia Tech alum at Georgia Tech. At 2016 is Madden and the Big Ten Network, correct?
Yep, kind of switched all together at the same time away from Georgia Tech into that, yes.
And obviously that also leads into a lot of opportunities with Fox in the football space, in the baseball space. And in 2023, becomes the voice of the Braves on what was Bally Sports Network, and I just don't even know what it's called anymore. Forgive me.
Yeah, it's FanDuel, but write that in pencil.
Yeah, that's it. You know what? Maybe you and I can work out a sponsorship before this is done. I guess the first question really I had, Brandon, because I do genuinely think there are going to be a lot of people listening to this that have heard you call a variety of sports, whether it's an IU basketball game or it's a football game, or they know you from Madden or from your time at Butler or the Braves. What's the balance for a broadcaster? Sports move in such different rhythms. Obviously, a basketball game is very different, I would imagine, to a baseball game, et cetera. What's the challenge? And maybe it's a good challenge from your perspective, but what's the challenge in sort of learning how to balance how to call one sport one day and then maybe have to turn around and do something completely different the next?
Yeah, it is different, and I do love that challenge, and that's not just a line, that's legit. I think it keeps you fresh when you go from sport to sport, and you kind of have to take the training wheels off after a few rides of the bike, but you get there and you're like, okay, that's how this one is, and that's how this one is. Now, the three big ones for me, as you mentioned, and where 95% of my attention have been in my career, are baseball, basketball, and football. You not only call them differently, you prep for them very differently. Football is more of a monstrosity because, especially when you do a college game, those rosters are so big and you've got 19 guys that somehow wear number 10. And so the prep for that and what you call your broadcast boards, which are basically your cheat sheets that you keep in front of you, it's just a lot more information, a lot more time to take to get ready for the game. So I usually, if I've got a college or an NFL game on a Saturday or Sunday, I'm spending the majority of that week just like a normal person working a 40-hour week at my desk at home, getting ready for both of those teams. Basketball, it's a lot easier, right? Most college teams have a 7 to 8, maybe 9, 10-man rotation. And so you can get through, if you spend one solid day and do it right, you can get your college basketball game prepped for. And once you get into a Big Ten season and you've seen those teams so frequently, by February or March, that even becomes easier. It's just an update of reading articles and making sure you've got the fresh information available. And then baseball is kind of somewhere in the middle, Zach. Baseball, what is so unique about baseball is the amount of time you have. It is more of a conversation with your analysts. You are not sped up like you are in the other two sports. So you can be a little bit more, I guess I should say, less economical with your words, more storytelling, and the prep is somewhere in the middle, because since there is time to fill, you need more stories. You need to go down to batting practice and make sure that you've got the pulse of the team and what's going on, and also pick up a fun nugget. Like yesterday I talked about two Braves, Matt Olson and Austin Riley, going golfing yesterday on their off day, because it's different, right? And some people might like to hear that Austin Riley beat Matt Olson in golf, and that's what they want, a little look into the inside of these players' lives. And you can do that a little bit more with baseball. So all three are a unique challenge, but I love doing all. And I grew up, as you said, in Indiana, and I grew up first and foremost around basketball, even though I watched the Braves on TBS every night and was a huge Braves fan. I was an Indiana basketball fan. That was my childhood. Bobby Knight, Calbert Chaney, who was from my high school. And so I love that I'm able to talk about these sports that I grew up watching and being so passionate about.
The important follow-up is, did they play congressional?
They did not. Actually, they played TPC. I forget what they said, but no, it was not fair. Congressional.
Congressional was the one that it seemed like the summer I interned covering the Nationals, everybody was playing instead of winning baseball games.
Yeah.
But I bring that up as an easy segue, because you talk about balancing different sports. And I remember talking to Dave Jagler, who did, I think still does radio for the Nationals.
He does, yeah.
About he would go call basketball games in the off season. I think Harvard was where he worked mostly. And I remember being 21 years old and not knowing how the world worked and thinking, oh my God, you do a whole baseball season and then go talk, go cover more sports. And he said it was kind of like a muscle that you had to keep working out. You had to keep it fresh.
Yeah.
Do you think for you, the muscle is obviously the voice, but maybe also that prep process, that just kind of that idea of you're constantly thinking about new ways to talk about different sports, to sort of enter into a different discussion? And I know that as you mentioned there, the nature of the sport is going to govern how much time you have to talk about something, how wide you want to sort of cast your gaze in the conversation. But do you think that in a way that muscle is not just the physical calling of the sport, but the whole process in a sense?
Yeah, it is. And I like the analogy you use. I've actually used that before when people have said, different sports, is it like kind of working the same muscle? I'm like, no, actually, that's a great analogy. It's all part of the same body, but maybe basketball is lifting arms. And if you look at me, you can tell that I don't lift much, but basketball maybe is getting the biceps and triceps, and football is the legs, and the torso is baseball, whatever the case may be. But yeah, you need to work those different muscles to stay sharp in those sports. Now, look, if I didn't call baseball or basketball, pick a sport for the next 3 years and picked it back up, could I do it? Sure. But just like not using that muscle for a long time, it would take you a little while to get back in rhythm. And when baseball season ended over these last 2 years, and I had for the first time called a full slate of baseball, jumping back into basketball was, to me, actually even more fun. And it also took me a little while to get my sea legs, because it is a different call. It's a different cadence. It's also different for me in this regard. If I call a baseball game for Fox and I am a neutral broadcaster, quote unquote, that prep is different than when I call a Braves game, because when I do a Braves game, I know that 90% of that audience, they are Braves fans. A lot of them rabid Braves fans like you, Zach. And so you know the stories on Albies and Acuna and Riley. I don't need to give you their biographical information. But when I am doing a Fox game, if it's, let's say, Braves Phillies, I kind of wind back my knowledge level and remind myself that, yes, there are Braves fans watching, but there's a lot of casual people watching. There's a lot of Phillies fans watching. And so that's when I'll remind people, hey, Matt Olson set the Braves franchise record a couple of years ago on homers and RBI. This year, not as good, but he's trending in the right direction. 3 homers in the last 4 games. And that sets the table that I don't really need to set for a more Braves-specific broadcast. And I guess why I say that is when I jump into Big Ten hoops or Big East hoops in the offseason, I also have to remind myself, all right, you're not a quote unquote biased broadcaster anymore. You're not the Braves guy here. You're the Fox guy or the Big Ten Network guy, and you're speaking to both fan bases, and you're speaking to casual college basketball fans. And I have to remind myself that the prep needs to be even, the delivery and care for both teams needs to be even, and that specific challenge of bouncing back and forth between those two mindsets is something that I really enjoy. And I love the prep. I do. I love. I reached out to you several years ago and told you how much I enjoyed your writing. I have since come to find that I don't believe that anymore. No, I'm kidding. You're wonderful. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, I thought I lost my screen.
I was canceling this out. I was going to stop my Venmo payments to you.
Oh, okay. I thought you were just muting me.
No. I just need to make sure you don't get the bribes anymore.
But the last thing I was going to say there, Zach, is truly, for what we do, we rely on the Zach Ostermans of the world so much because we want to get the pulse of these teams. And if we're doing 3 basketball games in a week, I want to know, where can I go to know what's going on with that team? I go to the beat writers. They're in it every day. And I want to read every article that you guys have written so that I have an understanding of what is going on with that team. And then when I get on campus and go to these shoot-arounds and talk to the coaches and players, I feel like I've already graduated from the 100 and 200 level, and I can have a 300 and 400 level discussion with them that's educated based on what I've learned from the beat writers. And so that is a tremendous help, and it's all a fun part of the prep process.
For the record, I was just trying to mute myself so I could cough, and then I started my camera, and I have no idea exactly what I did from there. So that's entirely my fault. That's the kind of professional podcasting production you can expect here at Mind Your Banners. I did want to return a little bit. You talked about your first sport is basketball. You went to Harrison High School down in Evansville, obviously. A fairly rich, I think it's fair to say, basketball tradition there. Calbert Chaney, Brad Brownell, Walter McCarty, a host of other players as well. I'd also point out you are, as I look at the Wikipedia page, listed among notable alumni of Harrison High School. So I'm just going to keep laying that on thick.
Wow,
but
it's a low bar.
Well, hey, listen, I'm not on Riverwood International Charter School, so I'm just saying, we're not created equal here. But you spend time, you talk about growing up in Indiana. You spend time, I imagine, when you're with Evansville, you're maybe not calling basketball exclusively, but that's probably a dominant piece of sort of that role. Obviously, you spent some time broadcasting games coached by a guy named Brad something at Butler. I can't quite remember his name, but I imagine you saw some pretty good basketball there. I know that you and I have talked about, both of us growing up watching the Braves, but how much did basketball as a sport and your sort of, your upbringing, where you grew up, and also just, some of those first roles in your career kind of inform who you wanted to become as a broadcaster?
Yeah, so much. It was my favorite sport to play. It still is the only sport that I play. I play it rather poorly, but I've got a group of guys that I play pickup with. And it's funny, my brother and I were talking the other day about what makes us feel alive. And one of the things that I listed was when I get to play pickup basketball, because it harkens me back to my youth. It takes me back to watching Indiana and the University of Evansville, the town that I grew up in. So when I was there, former IU player Jim Cruz, who played for Bob Knight and was part of that 76 team, was the head coach at the University of Evansville. And, back then, the University of Evansville was not obviously a Final Four contender. They would sell out their home games. They'd get 10,000, and they would play Loyola and Dayton and schools like that. And it was a really fun conference. And my dad and I and my brothers, we would go to pretty much every game. But while we rooted locally for the University of Evansville, Indiana was the big school, right? That was the state school, and that was the team that we followed. And we had the same obsession with Indiana basketball that most other people did in the state. And that was really my youth. And that was the sport that I grew up with, even though I followed the Braves from afar. Basketball was kind of more tangible to me, if you will, and was more the sport that people around me talked about. And so that's what I gravitated towards. And those early 90s Indiana teams, specifically with Chaney, with Nover, with Graham, with Bailey, with Henderson, those were kind of idols of my childhood. And I remember when Bob Knight was recruiting Calvert Chaney. And I remember Bob Knight coming to my high school to watch a game. And that was the talk of the town. And Evansville's not a huge city, right? It's not like Indianapolis, but Zach, it's also not a really small town. It's a couple 100,000 people. And that was the talk of the 200,000 people of Evansville was, oh my gosh, Bob Knight is coming down here and he is going to be in the flesh at the gym recruiting Calvert Chaney. And I remember when he walked into the gym that night and he had 3 or 4 police officers around him, because that's how popular it was. It was like the Pope was coming to town. And being at that game and just thinking, I am in this, and I was only 7 years old, but thinking I am in the same gym right now as Bob Knight. And I could not believe that was actually the case. But those were the rock star days of Indiana basketball, and those were really the memories of my childhood.
Did you? I mean, this is not obviously this is typically an IU specific podcast, but did you feel some of that too during your time with Butler, in the sense of? And I know it's a different time in your life and maybe a different journey for the program and so forth, but I think the reason, obviously, a lot of people latched on to Butler wasn't just it was great basketball, but also the story and the feeling that, something like that was still possible in an environment where we're constantly told money equals success in sports, and the big conferences are getting sort of richer and more powerful. Was there maybe some of that feeling too, again, with a little bit of different perspective from your time with Butler?
Yeah, when I went to Butler, my brother and my sister and one of my brothers had gone to Indiana, and my other brother had gone to Purdue. My mom went to Purdue. So we had the classic house divided. And I wanted to get into broadcasting, and Indiana had a great program for that. Obviously, it still does. But I wanted a smaller school, and I wanted to be in a city. And I had a cousin who went to Butler, who played as a walk-on for Barry Collier there and had a great experience. And so I ultimately chose Butler for that reason. But I was not a Butler basketball fan. I was an IU basketball fan. And when I got to Butler, you just slowly start to convert, not only because that's the school you're at, but also because that is when Butler started to get on the map. They made the tournament my freshman year and went to the Sweet 16, and the school just started to really grow into a basketball school at that time. That was 2003. So you're still 7 years before the first Final Four run, but that was kind of the impetus, the starting point for Butler taking off. And then I remember when Brad Stevens got the job and I had graduated, and I knew he was an assistant, but he looked to be my age. And I thought, wow, I'm really surprised that they hired this young guy. At the time, I think he had just turned 30. And then the rest is history, right? When I came back there to take that job, Brad Stevens was the coach. I took the job right after the first Final Four run. So right after the Gordon Hayward missed half-court shot. So I came in, and everyone, the joke was, oh man, congratulations, awesome gig, your alma mater, this is really cool, but you just missed it. You just missed your chance to go to the Final Four. And then lo and behold, they did it again. But what I remember so vividly about that time, Zach, was Brad Stevens had just become the new hot coach in college basketball because of that run. Nothing ever changed him. Still, nothing has changed him to this day. I just saw him a couple of weeks ago when the Braves happened to be out in Phoenix. It was more than a few weeks ago. It was the end of spring training, but he was out there at the same time, and we got together. And the same guy that I talk to now is the same guy that I met 15 years ago at Butler. Nothing has changed him, and that's what is so refreshing about him. But I remember he used to hold practices, Brad Stevens did, at 6 a.m. And he did that because he told the guys, this is the only time we can practice without any of you being disrupted by class. And I want you to get up. I want you to get your day started with a good practice. And then I want you to focus on your schoolwork. And he meant that. He wasn't just saying that. It wasn't an image thing. He really meant that. And when I got that job, when a practice started in mid-October of 2010, that would be, I started showing up at every 6 a.m. practice. And I remember after a week, he came over to me when the guys were drinking water, and he sat next to me. I would sit up in the bleachers of Hinkle about 15 rows up. And he said, so just so I know, are you going to be coming to all of these? And I said, well, I would like to come to all of them, but I want to make sure that's okay with you. I was told it's okay. He said, I love it. I just think you're crazy. But I went to those practices for two reasons. One, I loved hoops, and I wanted to make a good impression on the coaching staff and the team that I took this job very seriously. And I remember thinking, Brad Stevens is clearly a gifted basketball mind. I want to learn this game as best I can for myself, but also so that I can translate that to the viewers. And watching those practices and watching him operate like a surgeon and how good he was at handling people and managing those Butler teams was such a thrill for me. And I learned a lot about leadership from him. I certainly learned a ton about basketball, but I learned a lot about leadership from Brad Stevens, and I always carry those practices with me.
What is the transition like? Because you talk about going from a Braves broadcast where you're speaking to a pretty specific audience to, for example, a Fox game where you have to, you are kind of the neutral arbiter in a lot of ways of that game. What's it like when you make that transition into maybe calling games for like the Big Ten Network and Fox starting in kind of the mid 2010s? Because you have a run there of a lot of those jobs where you are talking to an audience that's there for, the Evansville Purple Aces, the Butler Bulldogs, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. What was that transition like for you when you're maybe sort of broadening out a little bit, but you're also having to think about and call games in a slightly different way because, suddenly you're not just the broadcaster for one side of the equation, but you're the one handling both sides at once.
Yeah, so there's two adjustments there. One is what you're talking about. It's shifting your mindset and splitting your prep and attention to both teams equally and getting equally excited for both. When I do a Braves game, if Matt Olson hits a home run tonight, I'm going to be a lot more excited for that than if Dylan Cruz hits a home run for the Washington Nationals. Now, I'll still give Dylan Cruz his day, and I'm not going to sound like somebody shot me, but I'm definitely not going to be as excited. That was the big thing, was reminding myself, okay, if you're working Indiana, Purdue, you've got to give both of these teams equal excitement. And sometimes the hard part about that is you can be so lifted up by the home crowd. If you do a game at Assembly Hall, like I've been able to do, the crowd will naturally pick you up. And you have to remember that when the visiting team does something good, you don't need to scream. You don't need to be obnoxious, but you need to bring the energy for that visiting fan base and really pick up the moment. If they've hit 3 straight threes and gone on a 9-0 run and Indiana calls a timeout, the crowd is silent. And it is your job to kind of pick up that energy and make sure that moment is felt properly for that other team. Whereas when the home crowd goes crazy, I always say when the crowd goes up, you go down. If I'm at home watching a game and the crowd is engaged and they're yelling and a 3-pointer happens, all I want to do is punch that call, 3 in the corner, and shut up, because the crowd is going to carry the momentum, and trying to fight and combat that crowd is a thing that is tough. So that's one of the first things. But then the other thing, Zach, is I was going from mostly radio, transitioning there in whatever that was, 2017, to mostly television. And speaking of what I just said, of kind of laying out, as we call it in the business, not talking, I just had to remind myself that this is not radio. You do not need to cover every second. You don't need to call every bounce, every shot. Sometimes I'll just watch a possession and not say anything, just to give the viewer a break. Or when the play's going on, if it's a 10-point game midway through the first half, I might turn to Robbie Hummel or whoever I'm working with and just have a discussion broadly about the team and where the Big Ten is at right now. And that's a tap dance that took me a couple years to learn, and I'm still trying to fine tune it. But just understanding that the viewer can see that they don't need you to over describe what is happening. And that those first couple of years was something that I kind of had to ease my way into.
Plus, it's a lot of work to carry Hummel, obviously.
He's, of all the broadcasters, he's one of them. He's obviously a star. And what a story on that you probably have seen from being around him too is, at first when he got into it and he would go to Assembly Hall, fans would yell at him and chirp at him. But over the years now, he's done this, 7 years or so, people have realized how good he has gotten. And every time I am with Robbie Hummel at Indiana, the comment that he gets 9 times out of 10 is, man, I'm an Indiana fan and I want to hate you, but you're so good at your job that I love listening to you call games. And that to me, for Robbie, he didn't say this to me, but that's probably the ultimate compliment, when you can win over a fan base that did not like you because you wore a Purdue uniform, and now everybody likes and respects him. It's really pretty remarkable.
And now I just need them to say that about me too. If we
Yes.
can get them to say that about me, then we'll be fine. I obviously, I know you got to go soon, and I really appreciate the time. I have to, of course, ask you about the Braves thing before we're through. I mean, I am one of those people a lot of nights. Not last night. I was out playing soccer. Soccer is to me what basketball is to you. But, I am one of those people that's watching you most of the time. I tell people that the Braves are the team I'm most invested in, mostly just because it's my off season. I don't have time to watch a Falcons game. Not that that's an enjoyable experience anyway. Forgive me, Atlanta. But I can't work all day Saturday and then tell my wife I'm going to take off for 4 hours on Sunday. In the fall. What was that like for you? As much as you can maybe walk back through that process now, as somebody who did grow up as a TBS kid, like a lot of us down south, when that opportunity comes up, and what's it been like, especially now? I imagine, a couple years in, you feel like you've got your feet under the table a little bit. There's a comfort level there now too. Just walk me through, I guess, the last 2 years in 30 seconds. I recognize that's an incredibly loaded reporter question. But I'm just curious for it, mostly because, let's be honest, you're talking to a Braves fan.
Yeah. I mean, when I got that job, you're right. It was my dream job because that was the team that I had followed so closely. I did idolize Skip and the guys on TBS back in the day. I never thought that job would open, but when the former announcer Skip's son Chip Carey announced he was going to St. Louis, I thought, if there is one team job that I had interest in, it was that. There was not another team job that I would have gone after or been interested in. That was the only one, and I just never thought it would open. So I just figured things are going great at Fox. I was going to stay there. But when the Braves opportunity came and Fox said, yeah, like, well, you can keep calling games for us and do the Braves and we'll work it out. And I reached out and there was mutual interest, and it all happened so quick because Chip left late. So it was within 7 days from when we first connected to when the job was offered. And it was almost like a whirlwind where I had to sit myself down after saying yes to the job and myself and say, wow, did that really happen? And that first year was magical in 23 because the team was so darn good. Even though they flamed out in the postseason, it was just such a special record-setting year. And since then, the team has been kind of seesawing back and forth, up and down. But regardless of the team's play on the field, because of my tie to the team and to the city and growing up such a big fan, every night that I get to sit in that chair and put that headset on, it is a thrill. It is a unique thrill and something that I hope to never take for granted.
Do you ever tell Robbie Hummel that he can get some tips from Jeff Francoeur? Is that maybe one of the things that...
Nobody needs tips from Jeff Francoeur because I'm sure when God created Jeff Francoeur, he threw out the mold. He smashed the mold. There's nobody like that dude, and I mean that in the most endearing way. He is a charm and a way about him that is often imitated and never duplicated.
Last question for you, and I'm not. I would never ask a loaded question like, "What's your favorite place to call a game?" or anything like that, because Lord knows that Twitter would grab that sort of thing, and take it in all manner of directions. But I'm curious, as somebody who has called a lot of sports, called a lot of games, been at a lot of different levels of sports, is there something that when you're talking to people and they say, like, what's the coolest thing you've done, or what's a place, what's something that you've got to see, like the Palestra or something, like, is there something from your career, a moment, or certainly maybe like a venue or a specific I don't know, a rivalry game or something that it wouldn't occur to people, I guess, that they wouldn't immediately think of, oh, that's something that he's seen that I've got to go experience at some point myself. Is there anything like that from your career that you would tell somebody, you wouldn't necessarily think about it, but this is a really cool thing, and if you have a chance to go see it or watch it or experience it or whatever, I strongly recommend it?
Well, this is totally tangential and doesn't fully answer your question, but the first thing that popped in my head as you were asking that is I've gone to the Masters one time with my brothers, my two brothers and my father, and it is the only sporting event that I have been to that no matter how much somebody builds that up to you before you go, it still exceeds your expectations. I have never been more impressed at any sporting event than I was at the Masters with everything, the full experience, the food, the professionalism, the beauty, all of it. It was unbelievable. But I didn't call that. I was just there as a fan. But that is the one time where I thought this might be a letdown because everybody built it up so much, but they didn't build it up enough. And so I know that that's a unique one and not everybody gets to do that. I feel very fortunate to have done that. But if you can ever somehow get to the Masters, even if you don't like golf, that is an event that is second to none. And then I would quickly say one that's cliche that people say often is, man, calling a game at Fenway or Wrigley, it doesn't get any better than that. The other night at Fenway on Friday when the Braves were playing there and the Braves had their ace, Chris Sale, going and Garrett Crochet, the ace of the Red Sox, was going. It was 70 degrees with a little breeze. It was packed. It was beautiful. And I just sat up there and thought, how lucky am I that I get to do this? But even if you were at that game as a fan and just sitting there having a dog and a beer, I get really romantic about baseball. And with those two venues in particular, and the fact that they have never changed names, that they've got all the history built in, you think about the people that have played in those venues, that's about as special as it gets. So if you are a sports fan, and you've never made it to either one of those, put those on your list because they do not disappoint.
That's perfect. That's perfect, Brandon Gaudin. Thank you so much for joining us. You can hear him. I want to say TBS. I reflexively want to say TBS, or at least Turner South. You know what you need to do is you need to do at least once a year. You and oh my God, I'm totally forgetting Brandon Ingram.
DJ Nitkowski.
Yeah, and you and Ingram need to just switch in the bottom of the fifth inning. You remember when they used to do that?
Oh yeah,
because I would convince my parents to stay awake until the fifth.
Yeah,
and I would watch the game, and then whoever was calling the game between Skip, Pete, Joe, and Don they'd switch booths.
Yep.
And I'd take them to the radio in my room and fall asleep.
Yep.
So I think we should do that. I think we should Ben Ingram. I said Brandon Ingram. You should do it with Brandon Ingram too. I mean, it would be fun. It would be different. It would be interesting. You can tell I'm all over the place, and that's usually a sign that we need to crash out of this podcast as soon as possible. You can hear Brandon. Oh my God, Brandon Gaudin. I was about to say Brandon Ingram again.
Yes.
You can hear Brandon Gaudin on the FanDuel Network covering the Braves. You can hear him on Madden. You can hear him on Fox and the Big Ten Network in the fall and winter, and you can hear him on Mind Your Banners today, despite my sincere lack of professionalism. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey man, I appreciate it. Appreciate your friendship, and it's good to catch up, and hopefully we'll be able to cross paths in person here soon.
Absolutely. Thank you all for listening. This has been Mind Your Banners for May 21st, 2025, and we will talk to you soon as well.